Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. So this is part 2 in our video on the film Space is the Place. Now, in part 1, we didn't actually get into talking about the film directly. We just talked about Sun Ra and a lot of kind of context about his philosophy and his career and the mythology that he created and really embodied and lived as a way of setting up a lot of what's going to happen in the film. So if you're not familiar with Sun Ra especially, I definitely recommend that you go back and take a look at part 1 first, and you can find a link to that in the description below. But yeah, we're just going to jump right into talking about the film here. We'll talk about half of the film, and then in part 3, the final part, we'll conclude off the film, and that'll be coming in just a few days. All right, so Space is the Place was released in 1974, but produced over the years leading up to that. I think it was mostly finished by 1972. Then there was some post-production, and there were some delays before it was finally actually released in 1974. Now, the origins of the project go back to the late 60s. The project really began as concert footage that John Coney was shooting. They then shot just a sort of a few kind of like narrative sort of scenes that I think were mainly designed to kind of like bookend or just sort of space out what would be primarily a concert film. And then those elements, there was, talk about developing these things into a film. But this process was always very kind of improvisational and piecemeal. There were a lot of different ideas. Sun Ra worked on the script, but he also would sort of abandon the script. In the shooting of scenes, he often began to just sort of improvise his dialogue, as you can really tell from watching the film. At some point after production was already underway, the writer Joshua Smith was brought in, who Smith was really interested in the blaxploitation films of the time, and really interested in this kind of seedy world of pimps and whores and hustlers, and really interjected about 20 or so minutes worth of material there that doesn't really fit in with the parts of the film that Sun Ra really wanted. There's a whole kind of sex comedy sort of aspect to the whole thing that I've heard that when Sun Ra originally found this amusing and liked the addition of that material to the film, though in later times, once they began post-production, he wanted it cut and removed. So there is a shorter edit. The uncut version, and this is really the only version I've ever actually been able to get a hold of, is this 82-minute version. But apparently there exists a shorter Sun Ra edit that's just over an hour long that has a lot of that kind of sort of sexual and blaxploitational scenes largely removed from the film, though not completely, because some of it is just inherently integrated into the plot line. But the nature of the production, the fact that the plan was changed so many times, that there were so many different voices with very different ideas, that things were reconfigured in the editing process, that there was conflict over the editing process, makes the film really fairly incoherent. So I think it really demands, especially if we're trying to read this not simply as just sort of a cultural curiosity, but as in a cultural work with something significant, something that is a genuine expression of Sun Ra's mythology and philosophy and an artistic statement. I think we have to read it with a certain kind of critical eye of looking beyond some of the sort of surface contradictions and unevenness in the film, and trying to process and extract the gold hidden within the mess. Sun Ra was never satisfied with the film, and even I think late in the process wanted basically the entire film scrapped, and he wanted to sort of start all over again and reshoot it, feeling that the film didn't have enough of beauty and wasn't sufficiently an image of a better world, and that it didn't really do what it was that he wanted it to do. So all of that is important to keep in mind as we go through, though at the same time that all of that is true, I think there are moments where the film does things that are quite interesting that Sun Ra may not have or that no particular creator may have done, the way that some of the elements sort of clash or come into contact with each other, that has something I think interesting all of its own, and we can take a look at that as we go through here. All right, so the film opens. We see the starry blackness of space here, and well, we don't get a good look at it until a little bit later, but we see Sun Ra's ship moving through space. And over the top, we are listening to a composition called "It's After the End of the World," and so we hear the vocalist June Tyson, who we'll see in just a moment, intoning repeatedly, "It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet?" Which I think in hindsight, once we've seen the whole film, is a really interesting way to open all of this. What we're going to see dramatized is the end of the world. We're going to see Sun Ra's attempt to save the world, and then the kind of partial success of this endeavor. There's some real, I think, kind of ambivalence about what exactly happens and why as we move into the conclusion of the film. But we will end up with the destruction of the Earth. But the film opens telling us that it's already after the end of the world, and that we just need to wake up and realize that the world has already ended. This is a really interesting theme, I think, that interacts with things that we've already talked about on this channel, like, for example, the video we did on Alan Moore, and particularly the comic Promethea, the ending of the Hearing Trumpet, Leonora Carrington's novel, The Hearing Trumpet, and these other occultural works that deal with the end of the world, which, as we've been reading all the way along, it can often be understood as the end of the merely human world. What I think in kind of Sun Ra's vision would be this terrestrial mindset, as opposed to a cosmic viewpoint. So that the idea of here, I think, or one way that we could read what's happening in this film, is that this sort of limited earthbound perspective, that thing is already over, because it's a sort of illusion. It's completely out of sync and out of harmony with the cosmos and the true cosmic perspective. And we just need to realize that we are already in space and have always been in space. And so and I think in a way we can see that process being dramatized throughout the course of the film here. And then from deep space, we now cut to the surface of an alien planet, where we see a sequence of close-ups and details from a pair of paintings by the visionary psychedelic Bay Area painter Gage Taylor. And these are being used as establishing shots, so establishing this alien landscape. That I think work quite well. Taylor is kind of visionary and very obviously sort of chemically inspired. Landscapes here are drawn from the Bay Area and the Northern California landscapes, which will also be essentially how the alien planet is created. So the sequences that are filmed on this alien planet were all shot in the San Francisco this Golden Gate Park, with just the addition of a few extra props to establish this alien planet. So we see that's sort of Sun Ra in costume there on the left on this alien planet, and we see the alien sort of creature or plant. It's never clear exactly what it is, kind of floating there on the right, and then we see a strange alien fruit sort of hanging down from the top of the frame there. So just with these few additions, transforming the landscape of Golden Gate Park into an alien planet, which is quite similar to what Taylor is doing in his paintings of this sort of visionary and psychedelically infused rendering of some of these same landscapes. But now, rather than a kind of psychedelic vision of the planet Earth, we're now using those same sort of procedures to establish an alien world. And we follow Sun Ra moving through this landscape, and we also hear him sort of thinking out loud or reflecting on the nature of this planet and contrasting it with Earth, and then really trying to emphasize the beauty and the harmony and the vibrancy of this planet as a contrast to all the problems afflicting the planet Earth. So we hear him saying things like, "The music is different here. The vibrations are different, not like planet Earth. Planet Earth, sound of guns, anger, and frustration." We then get some shots of some of the creatures inhabiting this landscape. So as we mentioned here, we see this design for this, I don't know exactly what it is, some sort of technological plant animal sort of hybrid beings here that we see floating through the landscape that are, the designs are drawn straight out of the Gage Taylor painting Encounter that we looked at. We also see this mirror-faced and hooded figure who is quite obviously drawn from Maya Deren's Meshes of the Afternoon, the classic surrealist film that makes an interesting intertextual reference here. And we'll see this figure again, though it's never really clear what exactly this figure is supposed to be or what their role in the film is or their relationship to Sun Ra. But nevertheless, is a interesting, enigmatic alien presence, and I appreciate the Maya Deren reference. All right, now in a scene we see Sun Ra sitting with both the hooded figure. We see the alien sort of plant creature there floating in the background. We also see several Egyptian deities that we'll get a closer look at in just a few scenes here. So some sort of, conference going on, apparently. And then we get Sun Ra now sort of setting the plot in motion and stating at least one version of what his mission to Earth is and what the film will be about. As we go along, we'll get sort of conflicting bits of narrative, and how exactly this all resolves at the end remains kind of ambivalent and unclear. So we have to be aware of that as we're interpreting the text of the film. But anyways, we hear Sun Ra saying, "We'll set up a colony for black people here, see what they can do with a planet all their own, without any white people there. They could drink in the beauty of this planet. It would affect their vibrations, for the better, of course. We'll bring them here through either isotope teleportation, transmolecularization, or better still, teleport the whole planet here through music." So let's see, just a few comments here. One, the phrase transmolecularization. This, of course, is a word that we already saw in Sun Ra's account of his own experience of being taken to Saturn and shown various things. So this may refer to something along the lines of what we would call, astral projection, that rather being a literal bodily journey to another world. This is something, I think, again, rather like a transition from one sort of world, a kind of terrestrial worldview to something cosmic and something expanded. So we could certainly read it as a transformation of worldview here. I think Sun Ra is also just having fun, as we'll see him do again later in the film. Having fun with this kind of sci-fi jargon. What exactly isotope teleportation is just never really clear. But I think there's an interesting kind of poetry in just the use of these science fiction terms here. I think it's also worth emphasizing, this is something we'll definitely come back to, the beauty of this planet and the natural beauty of this planet. I think it's easy to read Sun Ra as a kind of Gnostic who is against the body and even against nature and wants to move from, kind of a material condition into a purely spiritual one. And there are times when I think Sun Ra does sort of sound that way, and certainly he always had a very ambivalent relationship to his own body and his own physicality. But I think that the emphasis on the natural beauty of this place and the way that they're really using the beauty of Golden Gate Park, which is a really gorgeous natural place, in the midst of a city, which is I think interesting dimension of this film. that moving to this planet also affects a reconnection with nature, and it affects their vibrations, that it would bring the people brought here into harmony with the cosmos and with nature, and I think that's important. So again, with some of this ambivalence about what exactly the mission is here, he starts off saying that they're going to set up a colony for Black people here, without any white people. But then he's also talking about teleporting the whole planet here through music, which are obviously those two intentions don't quite sit clearly. So again, I think there's an ambivalence about to what extent Earth can be saved, like can the whole planet be saved, or is this a mission simply to rescue Black people and from the inevitable death and destruction of Earth, and to take them somewhere else, away from this planet and the majority of the human race who are beyond the possibility of saving. There's a real ambivalence here throughout the film about that question. And after a brief title sequence where we see Sun Ra spinning in the blackness of space, we then cut to Chicago, 1943, where Sun Ra, now he'll be introduced here as Sunny Ray, which was Sun Ra's legal name. As a child, he had the name Herman Blunt, was nicknamed Sunny, and then later legally changed his name to Sunny Ray, but of course went by Sun Ra. So here we'll have him in a kind of semi-autobiographical scene where, Sun Ra actually really was employed playing piano in these kind of clubs in Chicago in the early 1940s. So drawing on his own biography here. Just worth noting, this is obviously a place of entertainment, not a place where cutting edge experimental or avant-garde jazz would be welcome. And almost right away, we are introduced to the primary antagonist in the film, a character known only as the Overseer, who's a kind of demiurge, sort of pimp, Satan, who I know has something of perhaps of a kind of plantation foreman about him, portrayed. Well, if we interpret him more as a human, portrayed as a Black man who profits off of the degradation and exploitation of other Black people, but he also, somewhat like Sun Ra, is also some sort of cosmic figure, which is where we get the more kind of satanic demiurge sort of aspect of him, that he is a kind of cosmic force working for the enslavement and working against enlightenment and liberation. So here we have him introduced, coming into the club, seeking entertainment. The Overseers, the actor Ray Johnson, who plays the Overseer, does a really great job, and I think his performance is definitely a highlight of the film. So anyways, we see him in the club, ready to have a good time, but he is quite displeased with Sun Ra, or Sunny Ray rather's piano performance, and asks the host of the club to have him removed and replaced by a different piano player. At this, Sun Ra, of course, refuses to get off the piano, and his piano playing becomes increasingly dissonant and chaotic, and in fact becomes so much so that he begins to literally destroy the club, and we see glasses shattering and things sort of exploding and people running and screaming in terror and smoke billowing onto the stage, which is a pretty fantastic and entertaining scene here. And then after everyone else has left, the Overseer and Sun Ra, who is now kind of dropping, or at least seems to be dropping some of his guise as a simple kind of humble musician working in a club, now confronts the Overseer. Now, it quickly becomes clear that the Overseer and Sun Ra are already familiar with each other, and here we get their kind of this dimension of them as something like cosmic, timeless entities who are locked in some sort of ongoing battle or struggle, perhaps for the soul of the earth, begins to emerge. So the Overseer now challenges Sun Ra to a game of chance, offering him several possible games that they could play. But Sun Ra now holds up a deck of what will reveal to be tarot cards, though a rather strange deck of tarot cards, and asked to name the game that they will play. Sun Ra says, "I say the end of the world." So naming the game that they will now engage in as the end of the world. So we have a really great transition to an entirely other landscape, where we now see them sitting at this table in the midst of a desert landscape. As will really become clear throughout the film, this landscape and this card game exists somehow out of time and space. Sun Ra, and here we see him really in his sort of cosmic guise, or his, the sort of full kind of cosmic majesty of what he actually really is. That he and the Overseer exist both outside of ordinary time and space, here playing this game, but they are also characters within the story. And then because Sun Ra chose the game, the Overseer cuts first, and we see him draw two cards. First, the World, which more or less follows the traditional design of the tarot card. We see the globe in the center, the four cherubic creatures in the four corners of the card, as in most tarot decks, all rendered in kind of a vaguely African sort of a style here. But then we see printed at the bottom of the card 1976, as if this card were choosing the particular stage or the kind of arena in which this sort of divinatory combat game of chance is going to play out. It also sets it several years in the future, so most of the scenes that are that make up the film were filmed in 1972, and so by setting this in 1976, they are looking just a bit into the film is set just a bit into the future from when the film is being produced. But of course, this is also a significant jump in time from their initial encounter in Chicago in 1943. He then also he says something about needing some transportation, and then we see him drawing the Chariot card, which is a Cadillac. And then the play passes to Sun Ra, who will draw a card which will feature his own vehicle. So as the Judgment card, we see Sun Ra's own ship. Now we get a look at the ship front on for the first time, and we can see that it is in the form of a pair of enormous eyes. I think it's quite interesting that the ship is the Judgment card. Certainly, the Judgment card, really connects to the themes of the end of time and the end of the world here. The traditional design of the Judgment card shows the resurrection of the dead in the events of the Christian apocalypse and the end of the world. So this judgment is the judgment of God, and I think the eyes kind of emphasize that it's almost as if this is like the judgment of the divine coming down to earth to judge it. And so the fact that only some people will be saved in the course of the film is, in a way, almost a kind of rewriting of that biblical, Christian narrative about the judgment of the dead and the separation of the elect, from the damned. But here they're being judged not for their adherence to Christian moral tenets, but on other principles instead, which will be developed as we go through the film. I think it's really interesting the way that the tarot is used in this film. On the one hand, it's being returned to its roots in games of chance. We do know that that's where the tarot deck evolved from, was out of cards used for playing card games. But we also see it used not just as a divinatory device to predict or to gain information about the world, but here in a really sort of magical usage to actually change and influence what's going to happen in the world, which I think is all quite interesting. Also, if we're looking for kind of film references, this game here that they're playing really obviously recalls the chess game with death in Ingmar Bergman's film, the Seventh Seal. And then we cut to what, at least initially, appears to be a rather unrelated scene. We see the orchestra now playing live here. We get a sort of sequence of shots of them playing. Just to point out a few of the principal musicians, besides Sun Ra, of course, that we will see in the course of the film. We will see and hear quite a bit of the vocalist June Tyson, who's a fantastic vocalist and important long-term member of the orchestra. The film will use quite heavily the more vocally oriented compositions from the orchestra's repertoire at that time, and of course using that as a way of transmitting and developing the themes and messages of the film. Beyond just being the important vocalist with the orchestra, Tyson also was really instrumental in the costumes and the kind of the stage design and the sort of theatrical element of their live show. And I believe also worked on some of the choreography. They often had dancers either on stage or even down in the audience in their performances. And I believe she was involved in some of that as well. It's been great to see in recent years she getting more recognition. Although she was so centrally important to what the orchestra did, she was also as the one, there were sometimes some female like backup vocalists as well that were included, but as the one really core female member, she was rather excluded. She never lived in the house with the male members of the orchestra, so she's both, as a woman, both kind of inside and outside of the orchestra. But I think in recent years, there's been a move to, really acknowledging how centrally important she was, even if she was also a bit marginalized within the group. Let's see, we'll also see John Gilmore, who we mentioned before, who led the orchestra for a few years after Sun Ra's departure from the Earth. We'll see him quite a bit, and we'll actually see him playing in a very brief scene, a character in the film. And we also see a much younger Marshall Allen, who we already talked about just a few minutes back. But then it becomes clear that we are actually inside of the ship, or that the orchestra, I kind of get the impression sometimes that the orchestra is the ship in some way, that so we could say either the ship is being powered, by the music being performed, but I also kind of get the impression that the music sort of is the ship, or that the ship is a kind of visual representation or image of the music and its power. But we see Sun Ra moving from the performance space into what is clearly the kind of control room of the ship, and using a keyboard here to pilot and direct the ship. And we also see some other kind of sci-fi design elements here and view screens and things like that. And now we see the ship approaching the Earth. And now flying over the Earth, and we see the ship shooting laser beams out of its eyes at the Earth, which is really great. I mean, this is, of course, a kind of classic sci-fi, B-movie thing to see an alien ship, kind of green screened or whatever, over the landscape and shooting out rays, which I think really emphasize that there's an inversion here that's happened in the film where Sun Ra and his entourage and the orchestra are alien invaders from another world who have come to destroy the Earth, right? Which is a really classic, sort of B-movie kind of sci-fi B-movie setup. But the inversion here, of course, is that they're the good guys. They are the saviors, and that the destruction of Earth is a sort of good and necessary thing. Again, I think this really resonates with some of what we talked about in Promethea and in the Hearing Trumpet again, about that sort of inversion, about the understanding of the destruction of the Earth as an image of a kind of radical transformation of consciousness and worldview here. But yeah, I love the way they use this sort of sci-fi B-movie material to emphasize that inversion. And then the ship lands, and while continuing to sort of shoot beams out of the eyes of the ship, the door opens in a scene that clearly references the day the Earth stood still. And then we see Sun Ra accompanied by several Egyptian deities and dancers and other perhaps members of the Arkestra. Again, I think it's not really clear whether the Arkestra themselves are actually on the ship or that we have a kind of equivalence between the Arkestra and the ship rather than them simply being passengers on the ship. So as we've already seen, Sun Ra himself appears in Egyptian garb, and we'll look at the iconography of his garb in just a moment because it really portrays him as an Egyptian deity as well. But we also see three other deities arriving here in the ship and then accompanying him in various scenes throughout the film, although they never have any direct dialogue or take any explicit actions. However, their costumes are quite elaborate, and one of the most visually striking elements in the film, and even just this image of Egyptian deities, descending from a spaceship, I think is one of the most striking images in the film. Certainly a kind of classic afrofuturist image here of deities and images from the ancient African past, now directly conjoined with futuristic and science fiction images, as if past and future were conjoined, or the future was contained within the past, or that recovery of the past opened up a pathway to a new future, and that's something we'll see developed in some other scenes that are to come here. So rather than simply being the sun god Ra, as we might expect, Sun Ra is marked in the film as the composite deity Amun-Ra, who was one of the chief gods of Egypt, particularly in the New Kingdom. Now, Amun has a long and sort of complex kind of evolution of his mythology, from being a member of the Hermopolitan sort of Ogdoad to I think he was the patron deity of Thebes, and then eventually synthesized with Amun-Ra, became a really national important deity. So as the composite deity, Amun-Ra, where Ra represents light and the intelligence that organizes and constructs the cosmos out of chaos, Amun is often taken to represent the darkness and the sort of the hidden and the invisible, where Amun represents the absolute in its kind of unknowability, is at least one way that we could look at it. So in the conjunction of Amun-Ra, we have both the visible and the invisible, the light and the darkness, the manifest, in Ra, the literal manifest existence, and then its kind of shadowy complement in this sort of non-material absolute background. So some of that same combination of opposites that we've already mentioned here of light and darkness that will continue to develop throughout the film. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see this Ra himself embodying both of these principles together in a composite deity, and really points to his really sophisticated understanding of Egyptology and his use of that iconography here in the film. We see the god Thoth in a couple of scenes. Thoth is the ibis-headed god of magic and wisdom and science and learning. Particularly as a lunar deity, Thoth is the lieutenant of Ra, right? Because the moon is the lieutenant of the sun. Thoth, particularly through the syncretization with the Greek god Hermes, or the Roman Mercury, is also transformed into Hermes Trismegistus, and is the sort of mythic founder of the Hermetic and the Western esoteric traditions, as of course Sun Ra would have been well aware. So important to see this deity present here as well. Then we also see two other solar deities who not exactly 100% clear who they are. So we see a falcon or hawk-headed deity with the serpent wrapped solar crown there on the left, who is possibly just another form of Ra, or maybe a form of Horus or Ra Horus composite, like Ra Horakti. Not exactly clear. Of course, Thelemites will be, or anyone who's familiar with the writings of Aleister Crowley will know Ra Horakti as Ra Horkuit. We also see a lion-headed female deity with the solar crown who is likely Sekhmet. There's a few other lion-headed goddesses who appear in Egyptian mythology that she could also be, but is likely Sekhmet. But yeah, both solar deities here. All right, and then just briefly leaping into the middle of the film here, there's a pair of scenes that have no direct connection to the main plot line, though they're suggestive and interesting in their own right. I believe they were both shot at the Rosicrucian Museum in Los Angeles. So in the first one here, obviously set in an Egyptian tomb, we have Sun Ra accompanied by Thoth and some other members of his kind of intergalactic Egyptian retinue here. Entering into this tomb and then resurrecting a dead pharaoh who I believe is being played by John Gilmore. The makeup makes it a little hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure that's John Gilmore. Which I think is quite interesting and I think connects back to some of that afrofuturist sense of moving backwards into the past and this Egyptian or African past, and so bringing Pharaoh back to life here, obviously referencing Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife, but also somehow that Sun Ra's presence on Earth is reviving this ancient African tradition of wisdom. I think is a really suggestive of image. And then we have another scene, again, obviously set in an Egyptian tomb, but now we see the robed and mirror-faced being from the planet, that we begin the film on, now appearing inside of an Egyptian tomb and performing a dance. Interesting connection there to Maya Deren, in addition to being a filmmaker, of course, was a dancer and incorporated dance into a lot of her work. So possibly, we can see this as developing, that connection or reference to Maya Deren's work. But I believe this is the only time we see the mirror-faced being appearing on Earth. So no obvious plotline connection. But I think it's kind of an interesting, nice sort of surreal image of having this, strange, enigmatic, mirror-faced being appearing inside of an Egyptian tomb. Interesting kind of conjunction of incompatible images there. All right, and then jumping back to just shortly after the ship's landing and a bit of interaction between Sun Ra and a news reporter and a crowd that's gathered there, we then get a kind of sequence of shots and images and some dialogue and kind of voiceover from Sun Ra, introducing some of the sort of philosophical ideas here throughout the film. We also get this is a really great image here. I really like this shot. Obviously shot Sun Ra with the ship behind him, reflected in what I think appears to be one of the crowns worn by one of the other solar deities that we just looked at here. I think it's a really great image there. And over this, we hear Sun Ra saying, "I am the altered destiny, the presence of the living myth." So again, this idea of the living myth, that he is the kind of mythic consciousness, as we'll see, opposed to the reality dominated consciousness of humanity, and this idea of an altered destiny, which is a difficult concept to get exactly a handle on, but is a really central term in Sun Ra's own kind of personal philosophy. Now, like the mythology, Sun Ra's, I think, personal philosophy needs to be understood as somewhat fluid. Sun Ra is not a systematic thinker, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but rather that he has a set of ideas and concepts and images that are constantly being reconfigured and re-understood and transformed for different purposes. He's not a system builder, so it's difficult to make generalizations about Sun Ra's kind of ideas. And so I think Alter Destiny takes on different resonances or different valences at different times in Sun Ra's work, but always pointing towards the idea that I think another really nice place where Sun Ra has a great capacity for avoiding either side of what's taken to be a binary opposition here between, I think, destiny and free will, that it's not simply that we are doomed to a particular outcome, which is clearly a very negative, destructive outcome. But it's also not simply that we can choose whatever future we want, but that rather there's a possibility of an alternate destiny that we, through our action or through a transformation of consciousness, we can somehow make some kind of paradigm shift onto a different track, and so we will still have to fulfill a destiny, but it won't be the same destiny that we are on now. That there's a kind of latent possibility, within humanity or the earth or human consciousness. Again, it's never clear exactly the nature of that, but there's this sort of possibility, and that Sun Ra, as a messenger, both in the film and I think in Sun Ra's own life and work, one way of understanding his message is of trying to alter our consciousness and make that jump to the alter destiny and this alternative possible future for humanity. And now we get an important sequence of words and images that help to develop this idea of alter destiny, and really starts to unpack Sun Ra's message and his philosophy and his mission here on Earth. So we see with these words, and we also get a sequence of accompanying images. So we can just sort of read and look through them, and then we'll jump back and try to unpack some of what's going on here. So he says, this music is all a part of another tomorrow, another kind of language, speaking things of nature, naturalness, the way it should be, speaking things of blackness, about the void, the endless void, the bottomless pit surrounding you. So here we've got what is essentially a kind of non-diegetic sequence. He's not particularly talking to any of the characters of the film, and we see him in a sort of variety of images that aren't, part of the literal unfolding plot line here, but are developing some of the themes and concepts of the film. So we first have him here just in a kind of indeterminate space, dressed in his as Amun-Ra. And he says that this music, his music, is all a part of another tomorrow. So another tomorrow is another way of talking about this alter destiny. It's not simply music from the future. It's music from a possible future, music from what could be our future. But not just a possible future. It's also another kind of language. And a language that speaks things of nature and naturalness the way it should be. So this other tomorrow, or another tomorrow, this altered destiny, is not only a kind of visionary leap into something previously undreamt of, a really radical transformation of everything that we think is possible. It is also a return to the source, and a return to naturalness and a harmony with nature, which to me anyways, it suggests a sort of resonance with the appearance of the Egyptian deities from a spaceship, that it's simultaneously a return back to an ancient source and a jump forward into a radically new future at one and the same time. Now, accompanying this bit of dialogue, we also have an image of Sun Ra. You maybe can't see it in the screenshot, but accompanied by the mirror-faced and robed figure, moving through what could be taken as the alien planet that we started the film on. It is clearly sort of filmed in the in Golden Gate Park, as those scenes are, but we don't have any specific markers of this being the alien planet. So this could equally be a natural setting here on on Earth. Also suggesting perhaps one way of reading that alien planet, that a return to nature and to the natural order that exists here on Earth would be a kind of journey to an alien planet for we humans who have lost touch with the natural order of the cosmos. I think that suggests a number of interesting ways of interpreting some of what's happening in the film here. But also that this music is a language that is able to speak about nature. And so a kind of a recovery, maybe there's some of that idea of a kind of primordial language, or the recovery of the original primordial language that is in touch with, the original kind of like primordial plan for existence. And then finally, we now get the sort of shift from this natural setting into the void of space, which is not in any sense a contradiction. Nature for Sun Ra is on the side of the void and on the side of blackness, not on the side of the sort of terrestrial or the human order of things here. So here when we're talking about nature and talking about another tomorrow, we're also talking about a shift away from the terrestrial mindset to a cosmic mindset that understands that we are in the void, that the earth itself is not a kind of stable, unmoving ground that we can rest on, but this is there is a bottomless pit surrounding us, that we are in sort of continual free fall, that there is no definite absolute ground, that we're always plunging into the unknown, and can never know or master everything around us. That this is part of this awakening to an altered destiny, and also the development of what for Sun Ra is a kind of black consciousness that is really, we can also of course understand it as a creation of a new set of values and images and myth that, unlike the kind of traditional Western associations with black and blackness, isn't sort of evil or simple ignorance, but is connected to the cosmic order of things. And we'll see that continuing to develop as the film progresses. All right, so we'll stop part 2 right there and pick up with the third and final part, and we'll talk about the final half of the film in just a few days here, and I will see you then.